Committee, also chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for your time tonight.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, so people want to know about a lot of things that James Comey may have information about, from the Hillary Clinton investigations to the impetus of the investigations looking into potential Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. What's the main focus for you?
Everything. Integrity in the Department of Justice, because everything you just mentioned, Shannon, goes to whether or not you can have confidence in the Department of Justice, and you can add into that FISA abuse, and you can add into that his memos, and you can add into that all the interviews he's done since he's separated from service. But, you know, the FBI had a criminal investigation into a presidential candidate, and then less than a month after that ended, they launched a counterintelligence investigation into the campaign of the other major presidential candidate. So that's a lot of power that we have given an entity, and it is not too much to ask for the former head of that entity to come explain to Congress the decisions made and not made during the relevant time period.
All right, John Solomon, who has been digging on this story for years, had an interesting piece in The Hill yesterday. Some of the bullet points he says in the headline to his pieces: FBI email chain may provide most damning evidence of FISA abuses yet. And he talks about the fact that the House is looking for communications, emails that involve Mr. Comey, FBI investigators, DOJ attorneys. And he says that this could be really relevant because pre-Carter Page FISA warrant, before they got it, he says, Solomon reports, that the intel community already had concerns about the reliability of the Steele dossier, and he claims the FBI was aware that Steele was talking with the media before that warrant was ever secured. Do you have more details on that timeline? Do you think you'll get more tomorrow?
I hope we get more tomorrow. I'm also on the House Intelligence Committee, so I knew most of what, if not all of what you just said. But the point you raised is the salient one, which are the FISA abuses, and whether or not the world's premier law enforcement agency should be relying, even in a marijuana case, should you be relying on information that you have not vetted, corroborated, or contradicted. This is an investigation, a counterintelligence investigation into the campaign of a presidential candidate. So what is the threshold for the reliability and credibility of the information? I have long known that the FBI did not corroborate that information before they used it the first time. Let's find out whether or not they made any effort to corroborate it before they used it the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time. And if not, why not? And that doesn't even get to the issue of the failure to include the exculpatory information that the Bureau had that I think a FISA court was entitled to.
All right. Mr. Comey's attorney, David Kelly, talking about this process and questioning whether you will be able to get more from his client. Your response, sir?
Comey needs a new lawyer. He needs one that's smart enough to know members of Congress don't issue indictments. We don't indict anybody. And not to correct Mr. Kelly, well, actually to correct Mr. Kelly, we didn't spend 2 years investigating emails. We spent 2 years investigating the murder of 4 Americans in Benghazi, but it was because we were doing our job that led to the discovery of the email. So, look, I'll see Mr. Kelly tomorrow. If he's got any issues with how Congress conducted that investigation, he can tell me about it tomorrow.
All right. Mr. Comey tweeting this after he went to court to challenge the subpoena that would bring him before you all. He says, grateful for a fair hearing from judge. Hard to protect my rights without being in contempt, which I don't believe in. So we'll sit in the dark. But Republicans agree I'm free to talk when done, and transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest I can get to public testimony. He said all along he doesn't want to do this behind closed doors. How about the deal that you all reached? Will it be effective?
I hope so, but Shannon, think for a second. Think back to what his lawyer just said about Bob Mueller and all the praise that he just lavished on Mueller. Not a single one of Mueller's interviews was done in public. Not a single one of the grand jury meetings was done in public. There's never been an FBI interview ever in the history of mankind that was done in public. So why Jim Comey, who the last time I was in a public hearing with him, over 100 times he said, I cannot answer in this setting. Why Mr. Transparency wants to go back to a setting where he knows he cannot answer the questions is befuddling to me, and I don't think my fellow citizens buy that.
Well, maybe that's one of the questions you will ask him tomorrow, as you and the Democrats, rotate with your hour on, hour off. We know it could be a long day and into the night on Friday, so we will be standing by. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the preview.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
James Comey, tomorrow, buddy, is your day of reckoning. Will you finally admit you tried to tip the scales for Hillary Clinton, or continue to try to pull down President Trump? After weeks of negotiation, the former FBI director tomorrow scheduled to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee on everything from alleged federal spying on the Trump campaign to his leaking of details on his interactions with the president. Earlier today on Fox News, Arizona GOP Congressman Andy Biggs said Republicans plan to read him the Riot Act. Watch.
Mr. Comey knows a whole lot, and things like why he kind of usurped Attorney General Loretta Lynch's authority when he wrote his exoneration letter, why he pre-wrote it before the investigation was complete. I mean, we're still dealing with that stuff that we haven't resolved. We need to know about the leaks that he issued and how he manipulated appointment of a special counsel, inconsistent statements with his public statements and testimony that he gave to the Senate. I mean, there's a whole lot with Mr. Comey, and then we need to move into personnel that he worked with and what he knew about them, their biases, and why he left them in place and why he chose Mueller to kind of get to the special counsel, his relationship with Rod Rosenstein. There is a whole host of things that Mr. Comey knows, and he's made statements on. Some of them haven't been consistent, so we need to get to the bottom of that as well.
Congressman Biggs will be among those questioning Comey tomorrow. The former FBI director claims he wanted the hearing to be public, but it won't be. Instead, we're going to get a transcript on Saturday, and in a tweet, he explained why, saying, quote, "Grateful for a fair hearing from judge. Hard to protect my rights without being in contempt," which I don't believe in. "So we'll sit in the dark, but Republicans agree I'm free to talk when done, and transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest I can get to public testimony." Oh, Jim. But now there's also a troubling report out on the now infamous FISA warrant application that initially led to the spying on the Trump campaign. According to The Hill, Comey and others knew the evidence for that warrant was shaky before the investigation began, but they pushed hard for it anyway. So should we believe what Comey says when he appears in the Capitol tomorrow? Joining now, Fox News national security strategist and former deputy assistant to President Trump, it is Dr. Sebastian Gorka, rejoining the show. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me back.
Look at that. Also the author of Why We Fight. We spoke about that book just weeks ago. So let's talk a little bit about James Comey and his connection to special counsel and how leaking the memos that he had written, some of which contained classified information, made their way into the public sphere. And that's how we have Robert Mueller. What do you want some of these committee members to push hardest on?
Well, this might surprise you, Kennedy, but I'm less interested in his culpability in giving Hillary a walk. I think we have to concentrate on the crimes that this man committed when he knowingly leaked the briefing that he gave to the president-elect, President Trump, to his friend, who was not only a so-called professor, but we now find was a special employee of the FBI, and leaking that private briefing to the Washington Post, then afterwards taking what he deemed to be his private notes, but that he had written on a government laptop on government time and treating those as if they were personal. This man has all kinds of things to answer for, not even starting to discuss his culpability with the botched investigation of Hillary.
Well, it was a rather abrupt ending to the Hillary investigation when the Trump investigation began, and there are several outstanding questions, particularly with Christopher Steele, and how do they know, because if that was the basis for this FISA warrant and the application that the FBI put forward, how do they know that Christopher Steele wasn't gathering some of the information from Russian agents illegally?
Well, look, not only that, if John Solomon's reporting today is accurate, this individual, the former director of the FBI, is in serious legal jeopardy because he is inside that email chain of communications whereby the DOJ and the FBI recognize how dubious the Steele dossier is before they applied for the FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign, which means James Comey knew that there was exculpatory evidence that file should never have been used for a surveillance warrant. And he also potentially lied about when they fired Steele as an asset of the FBI. Up to now, they've told us, oh, he was leaking to the press after we got the FISA warrant, and that's why we fired him. John Solomon says, wrong. That's a lie.
But that couldn't possibly be true, because it was those press reports that were also the basis for the FISA warrant,
right,
which, you know, creates this circular reasoning. The FBI, on its face with basic investigation, should have seen that and nixed the whole thing. They knew that. You know, one of the questions that I think they should press James Comey on is, what role did Bruce Orr play in all of this?
Yes.
And when?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not only that, when you have the FBI investigators allow people who are suspects in the Hillary case to actually act as counsel to Hillary, and then the FBI, this is unheard. The FBI was ordered to destroy Hillary's laptops. On what basis? That decision had to have come from the 7th floor of the Hoover Building in Washington, and that might actually lead to the very desk of former FBI Director James Comey.
Well, doesn't that mean that he has, in fact, committed perjury in some of his congressional testimony?
Yes.
Well, if that's the case, and so now we're hearing that when Democrats take over these critical committees, including the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, that they are going to hand over some of the testimony of Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr., among others, so Robert Mueller and his team can look for inconsistencies. If that's the case, isn't it fair that they do the same thing with James Comey and some of his testimony?
Absolutely. Let's find out who committed perjury, including former DNI Clapper. And also, the biggest question of all, Kennedy, is when did the surveillance operation on the Trump campaign begin? Who initiated it? Because right now, if you follow the writing of Lee Smith, of Sarah Carter, of John Solomon, it looks as if John Brennan, with an international sting, remember that Australian diplomat and Papadopoulos, started the whole chain and then told James Comey to open a file here in America. If that's the case, the perjury is all over the map. CIA, FBI, DOJ.
And you know, we also have to see if national security was compromised in any of this, because as with Hillary Clinton and you know, her server scandal, that is the biggest issue. Were lives ever at stake, and was government power abused in order to obtain politically damaging information? So far, they have not achieved their goal of pulling down the president yet. They're still working furiously to connect those dots, and we will keep our eyes on all of it. Thank you, Dr. Gorka.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.